Right, so just as a disclaimer before we start, I made a video very similar to this on my old channel. If you remember it, it was terrible and you shouldn't. This isn't the same video. I'm not remaking the same video. That would be pointless. I would just re-upload the old video. This is a video on the same topic but better, with like actual production quality.
Captain!
Yeah?
No! Oh, no, 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 no! No! Dude, we have so much shit to do! Holy fucking shit! Go! Connor, get down there! Connor, go!
It's 2003 and the newly created Wales and Borders franchise has nearly finished the tendering process. Let's meet the competitors. Firstly, we have Arriva, a company who are incapable of running buses, let alone trains. Secondly, we have a joint venture between Connex, owned by a bin wagon company, and GB Railways, who would go on to be bought by bus operator First Group, who also can't run buses. Next, we have coach operator National Express, who I would be able to slander if I cared about buses and coaches, but I don't, so I can't. And at the end we have a joint venture between public sector scam artist Serco and the Dutch state rail operator Abellio. It's possible that with seemingly zero good options, the Strategic Rail Authority decided that Arriva would be the best option, but as time would tell, this was not the case. Arriva found themselves inheriting a franchise that had been mashed together. Previously, different sections had been run by different companies. You had the imaginatively named Valley Lines, running routes around Cardiff and the valleys. You had Central Trains running the Cambrian coast between Birmingham and Aberystwyth. You had the very imaginatively named Wales and West, who operated the services between North and South Wales, and then services along the North Wales coast were operated by First North Western. As you can see, the people of Wales were presented with a totally not confusing, cohesive and well-integrated rail network. Naturally, it made sense for these services to be merged into one franchise, as they were in 2001. So, I hear you asking, if the franchise was merged together in 2001, why did Arriva inherit such a mess in 2003? Well, two reasons. First being, this is the railway and nothing moves quickly. In many cases, not even the trains. So the second reason being, incumbent operator National Express were probably aware they weren't going to be awarded the new franchise, so didn't take the required steps to improve the network. Arriva Trains Wales inherited a fleet of mostly decades-old rolling stock, with the exception of the new Class 175s. But 11 of those were needed by TransPennine Express on a daily basis until the delivery of their Class 185s in 2005. Now, in this post-privatisation era, with record investment in the railways and a Blair government wielding an enormous pen to sign equally enormous cheques, surely ATW would be receiving lots of new rolling stock. Well, it's a good thought, and frankly a very sensible one. But while every single other franchise was getting new rolling stock and investment, the government decided that ATW didn't need that treatment. Maybe this is because, in true Blairite fashion, they were too busy committing constitutional vandalism, or perhaps they just didn't want to. We may never know. So what did Arriva Trains Wales inherit? Well, other than the aforementioned Class 175s that received Class 142 and Class 143 Pacers, Class 150 Sprinters, Class 153 Sprinters, Class 158 Express Sprinters, and Class 57 locomotives to haul Mark II coaching stock. Now, you may be thinking that the rolling stock Arriva Trains Wales inherited was pretty poor, and for the most part you'd be correct, especially as Arriva had the same attitude towards maintenance and refurbishment as Nadeem Zahawi has towards paying taxes. But if you were one of those weird train enthusiasts, it was quite good. Post-privatisation, locomotive hauled services were becoming more of a rarity as train operating companies acquired more multiple units. So when ATW were running 57s and Mark IIs along the North Wales coast and leasing Class 50s to haul Mark IIs in the valleys, I imagine it was pretty good. I have to say imagine, I never experienced either. I'm not old. However, if you were a commuter, it was probably quite grim. But never fear, because future economy murderer and owner of ridiculous eyebrows Alistair Darling decided that Class 150s, displaced by the arrival of new Class 170s at First ScotRail, could be transferred to Arriva Trains Wales. Bizarre looking at this retrospectively. One would have thought, given his attitude to bailing out the banks, he wouldn't have had much of an issue getting Wales some new rolling stock. But no, hand-me-downs for Wales it is. I wanted to make sure all of my sources were cited for this video, so after hours of searching I was able to find a statement from Alistair Darling on the Department for Transport's website from the time. It reads, and I quote, "I'm such a fucking disgrace to this department, the cabinet, my party and country that I should buy a one-way ticket to Geneva and book myself in at Dignitas. But I'm not going to, because I have dubious decisions to undertake in regards to the public finances. When Gordon finally takes over from Tony and gives me a real government job that isn't managing this glorified Hornby set." His words. In 2006, the year railway powers were devolved from Westminster to Cardiff Bay. And don't worry, we'll get to that. Network Rail decided it would be funny to trial ERTMS, specifically ETCS, on the Cambrian line. Arriva Trains Wales said, and decided that the necessary modifications for the rolling stock to run on this line, after the upgrades were complete, would only be done on the Class 158 fleet. Well, fine, it's only 158s running on that line anyway, but they'd now had those 11 Class 175s that were being leased to Transpennine Express on a daily basis back, and they were starting to make their way down to South Wales. So it's a reasonable assumption that had Network Rail not made this change, 175s would eventually have found themselves on the Birmingham Aberystwyth services. However, this did mean that if an unforeseen issue took out the entire Class 158 fleet, that would leave the whole Cambrian line with no service. Not that it would be the Class 158 fleet that was taken out of service in its entirety. This, ladies and gentlemen, is... ladies, I've seen my analytics. This, gentlemen, is called foreshadowing. Remember how I said we'd get to devolution? Here we go. Now the Welsh Government had control of every railway west of Alfred's Dyke, they could start making some big and important changes. New rolling stock? Electrification? New paint on the trains? Yes, that. They did also allow Arriva Trains Wales to buy a 50-year-old Class 121 bubble car to operate the Cardiff Bay shuttle, which meant Arriva Trains Wales were once again appealing to the veg. Right, now I could be wrong here because I couldn't find out exactly who the Economy and Transport Minister was in 2008, because it would have required more than like 30 seconds of researching, and I've already given up on this video. But I believe it was Ieuan Wyn-Jones, which is a Welsh as fuck name. But anyway, Big Ieuan, who was elected for Ynys Môn, and this is important, took the totally not self-serving decision to introduce a premier service from Cardiff to Holyhead serving food. For some reason this was put out to tender. I don't really know why. Just give it to Arriva Trains Wales. They run that line, but they put it out to tender, and the bidders were Arriva Trains Wales, Grand Central, and Wrexham and Shropshire. Arriva Trains Wales owned by Arriva, Grand Central owned by Arriva, Wrexham and Shropshire owned by Arriva. So you had Arriva competing with each other on 3 fronts, which isn't competition, is it? Is it? Right? Anyway, the tendering process came to an end, and in a huge blow to Arriva, Arriva Trains Wales were awarded the contract. This meant that Ieuan and all the other North Wales Assembly members could finally get breakfast on their way down to Cardiff and a 3-course meal on their way back. Admittedly, this was probably the only good thing Arriva Trains Wales ever did. I did that service about 5 years ago, and it was incredible. The food is awesome. I highly recommend it. In 2010, Arriva Trains Wales lodged an application with the Office of Rail and Road to operate a service between Aberystwyth and London Marylebone, using a slightly different route to Wrexham and Shropshire, but mostly the same. It would continue to Birmingham International, as it does now, you know, through Wolverhampton, Smethwick, New Street, into Birmingham International, and from there it would go on to Leamington Spa, Bicester North, and then send it straight into Marylebone. Wrexham and Shropshire protested, saying it would affect their revenue. So we were once again met with a situation where Arriva were competing with Arriva, and on the complaint from Wrexham and Shropshire, the Office of Rail and Road declined the application. A year later, Wrexham and Shropshire would decide to go bust anyway. In 2012, the Department for Transport announced that the Valley lines would be electrified. We're 11 years on from this and it still hasn't happened. Make of that what you will. This was the same year Arriva Trains Wales received some new rolling stock. By new, I mean 25-year-old Mark III coaching stock to replace the 40-year-old Mark II coaching stock. But they would now be making use of a DVT, so the locomotives would never have to switch ends, which is helpful, I suppose. Although, you know, new multiple units where you don't have to worry about a loco at all would also have done the job. Just saying. These rakes of coaches would be hauled by Class 67 locomotives leased from Arriva's parent company, DB, who had them available because they were basically useless for hauling anything other than passenger trains. And that's really good for locomotives in an era where locomotive hauled passenger trains basically don't exist. Around this time, having seen the absolute state of the rolling stock Arriva Trains Wales were running, the Welsh Government decided to give them some money to refurbish the Class 158 fleet, which was actually done quite well. It was a good refurbishment. In 2014, Arriva Trains Wales picked up another Mark III locomotive hauled set, without the dining car in it, to run peak time services between Manchester and Llandudno, which was fucking stupid, right? The fucking 67s, right? They are so slow. They are pieces of shit. They are slower than a paraplegic sprinter, right? So, and they couldn't go down to Manchester Airport either. The Llandudno Manchester service goes to Manchester Airport, but the 67s couldn't go to Manchester Airport because someone at Alstom in 2000 thought it'd be really funny to build a 90-ton locomotive on 4 axles, which is really good. So it had the route availability of your neighbour's shagged old rusty Escort with no MOT. Brilliant, really good. But the Mark III coaches, because they're intercity style coaches with doors on the end, it takes forever to get passengers on and off, which is really good at platform 13 and 14 at Manchester Piccadilly at peak times, isn't it? It's a really good idea, isn't it? And again, because the 67s are so unbelievably slow, they could not pull the skin off a rice pudding. They're so slow, it took an extra 10 minutes to do the journey between Manchester and Chester, right? And then after Chester, it couldn't call at Shotton or Flint like it normally would. It had to go straight to Rhyl, because if it didn't go straight to Rhyl, it'd hold up the Virgin Trains London to Bangor service that ran behind it.
A mental breakdown is a common way of describing an episode where a person has difficulty functioning mentally and emotionally. When someone experiences a mental breakdown, they often feel like they can no longer cope with the stressors of life, and they...
In 2016, Arriva Trains Wales began the process of fitting their rolling stock with free Wi-Fi. Yes, as an ATW customer, you could get a whopping 20 megabytes of free Wi-Fi. A useless gesture, because by 2016 everyone had basically unlimited data contracts on their phones, so 20 megabytes of slower Wi-Fi, so it's really good, but it's the thought that counts, right? In 2018, the entire Class 175 fleet was withdrawn due to safety issues. This is due to wheel flats. Now, initially this was thought to be some sort of inherent flaw with the wheel slip protection system on the 175s. It's not a big jump to make. 175s have had their issues with rust and spontaneously combusting on at least 7 occasions. The withdrawal of all 27 Class 175 crippled Arriva Trains Wales' ability to run a service. However, some services were unaffected because any opportunity to drop Class 150 on Holyhead Maesteg or a single Class 153 on Manchester to Milford Haven pleased ATW greatly. After an investigation, and with the 175 spending some time on the wheel lathe, it was concluded that the wheel flats were caused by a track defect between Newport and Cambrian, which is embarrassing for Network Rail, but at least Arriva Trains Wales can wash their hands of something that went wrong. It was this year ATW's contract to run the Wales and Borders franchise was coming to an end. The people of Wales were just crying out for a competent organisation to take over. So the shortlist included bids from Arriva, brilliant, Abellio and Carillion, Keolis Amy and MTR. What are the chances of a multi-billion pound public sector contractor going under? 1 in Carillion. Right. That's a Bellio out. Arriva voluntarily withdrew, presumably out of shame, which left Keolis, Amy and MTR. And at the end of May that year, Transport and Economy Minister Ken Skates announced that the franchise would be awarded to Keolis, Amy. Again, wanted to make sure I had all my sources cited, so I went digging through the Welsh Government's website and was able to find a statement from Ken Skates at the time about this. It says, and I quote, "I get my teeth whitened and spend more time tanning than President Trump because I am a closet American. Anyway, I've awarded the franchise to Keolis, Amy because they were the least worst option. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to have a crank because my wife no longer loves me." His words. So thankfully, that's where the Arriva Trains Wales story ends, which is good because I'm on the verge of having an aneurysm. Please hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more videos like this or any of my travel content. I've got a few videos lined up for the next few weeks. I've filmed with the new Merseyrail trains today, so that video will probably be up next week. But thanks for watching, and sayonara. West of Offord Dyke. I'm gonna murder that fucking cat. Do you think you're funny? Do you think you're funny? What is your problem? What is your problem? Don't come in here.